Une sorte de satellite de la Chine. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut répondre à cela?
Jamais.
Then you've got something else at play. And that's exactly what the scientists have been predicting for half a century. It is here now. California, folks, is America fast forward. What we're experiencing right here is coming to a community all across the United States of America unless we get our act together on climate change, unless we disabuse ourselves of all the BS that's being spewed by a very small group of people that have an ideological reason to advance the cause of a 19th century framework and solution. We're not going back to the 19th century. We're not apologists to that status quo. We believe in the fresh air of progress versus the stale air, emphasis, stale air, normalcy.
Now we're again breaking records. Mother Earth is angry. She's telling us, whether she's telling us with hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, fires in the West, whatever it is, that the climate crisis is real and has an impact.
It's always all about climate change. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. So today I wanted to cover the wildfires that have just been wreaking havoc upon the state of California and the Pacific Northwest. You know, this has just been an issue I've talked about previously, just namely how inept policies in the past have just increased the tinder, underbrush, and just this has just accumulated over the past few decades or even possibly 100 years. But the crux of the Democrat argument right now is that it's from climate change. I mean, sure, they can argue that this creates drier conditions for the megafires to start, but in reality, they fail to address the policies which have allowed the accumulation of the said underbrush and what's called charperel in California. So charperel is that small little bushes that you see on the hills of California. But because of already hot, dry conditions that exist in California, charperel is one of the most fire-prone plants in the world. So when you couple that tinder with periods of very hot, dry, easterly Santa Ana winds and human activity, you have high chances of wildfires to start. So most of the time, wildfires are not caused by, natural, creations, but rather arson, power line failures, vehicle fires, sparks from machinery or campfires. California, for example, has a large bureaucratic network designed to protect trees and the environment when it comes to, logging, prescribed burns, or what people know as controlled burns. But only in 2014 did they make it legal to perform prescribed burns on private lands. It's still very difficult to get a permit to perform prescribed burns in California on public land. So it's a slow process. It could take up to 18 months. For example, fewer than 90,000 acres of California were actually intentionally burned in 2018. So to put things into perspective, a specialist said that that number needs to at least quadruple for it to be a healthy environment for humans and just plant life. I just don't understand why California makes it so difficult to perform controlled burns. Should they not have learned from history? Like Native Americans actually performed controlled burns all the time for thousands of years. So let's talk about the history. Contrary to common belief, the Americas were not quote-unquote untouched by human interaction. Many different native tribes practiced controlled burns in order to shape the landscape to their advantage. Some wanted to funnel game down cliffs for an easier hunt, or to create more open areas and avenues for hunting without sticks and broken limbs which created noise. Others wanted to facilitate agriculture by recycling mineral-rich ash, or to increase nut production. They also wanted to increase the population of their hunted animals by killing ticks and increasing grasslands. Overall, it helped nurture the environment by having a cyclical pattern of burns. So, when Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who was the first European explorer in California, discovered the Santa Monica Bay, he nicknamed it the Bay of Fumes due to its thick smoke in the area. This appearance of what would later be known as Los Angeles seemed to be due to the controlled burns created by the Chumash natives. As a result, the geographic mountains retained the smog and smoke within the valley and basin. Ultimately, with colonization and native populations vastly decreasing, radical disruption of the native burning practices ceased almost entirely. Furthermore, by the early 20th century, fire suppression had become the official U.S. federal policy. The U.S. Army began to administer Yellowstone National Park and began to fight fire, quote unquote. The U.S. Forest Service adopted the policy of putting out all fires, which was hoping to save human lives, timber business, and animals. People also could be fined for burning on their own lands. By 1968, it became evident that sequoia trees needed fires to grow, and people began to rethink the policies. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection gradually reintroduced fire to their landscapes, but in select doses. California then ultimately passed two pieces of legislation, the California Environmental Quality Act in 1970, or CEQA for short, and the Forest Practice Act of 1973. The purpose of CEQA was to prevent or minimize damage to the environment through mitigation monitoring. As a result, if you want to do business in California, you must be approved by a state board with an Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, to determine the impact of a proposed project. For example, if you are submitting a timber harvest plan, you must adhere to the strict requirements of CEQA and the Forest Practice Act of 1973. These strict regulations slow down the ability for businesses to receive a permit to cut timber with red tape policies such as not cutting around temporary roads, streams, certain tree circumferences such as 32 inches in diameter at stump height, age of the tree, by buildings, and among other stringent requirements. The submitted harvesting plan must be reviewed and renewed frequently, with bureaucrats monitoring the progress throughout its lifetime. As you can imagine, this has turned away many business opportunities for California and actually reduces the water supply available for human use, since water is unable to flow down to residential areas. Instead, it is absorbed by the undergrowth and trees alike. This undergrowth also becomes very thick and makes for tall wildfires. On the other hand, if an area is cleared by loggers, they shred the small trees and underbrush with a machine called a masticator and spread the chips around the forest floor. As a result, the trees are more widely spaced, so if a wildfire comes through, it would likely stay on the ground and would not harm the trees or emit as much carbon. As for federal policy, Republicans back in 2014 attempted to reduce the bureaucracy associated with hazardous fuel projects that thin out overgrown forests. The bill passed in both the House and Senate, but was vetoed by the Obama administration in order to placate environmentalist lobbyists who thought it would undermine the 1969 National Environmental Policy Act. So what is the solution? I would say if I was in Congress, I would repeal or at least amend the aforementioned laws that were mentioned previously. I would increase logging in California to give a boost to the economy and reduce the levels of the fire, so the height. Promote controlled burns, stop blaming climate change, make use of the homeless population. So if you repealed, let's say, Prop 47, which doesn't allow people to get put in prison or jail if they steal something at $950 in value, it used to be $150, now it's $950. Then challenge also Jones versus LA that allowed homeless people to sleep on the sidewalk in tents legally. That was back in 2006 or 5. So you can say an ADA violation, so American Disabilities Act, you got to have wheelchair access or sidewalks. So then you can issue then maybe truancy tickets, drug offense tickets. And then once they get placed into prison or into a medical facility, you can have these people working on reducing the underbrush in the mountains, or at least in outside the city. But other than that, I would want the homeless population to have funding for medical services, perhaps, if we lowered marijuana legalization taxes. So I know they're one of the highest cash crop taxes or tax cash crops in the United States right now. So if you were to reduce that, you can use the revenue that would eliminate the black market virtually, and then use that revenue to give care to the homeless who actually really need it. Not to perhaps like illegal immigrants, for example. So then, once you're sending out people that are in prison to actually go work on, reducing the underbrush in the mountains. Perhaps, this would overall reduce the amount of wildfires in the area. None of these things politicians are currently talking about. They're just talking about climate change. So, what does that do? They're just going to try to pass their new, not the Green New Deal, but the Thrive Act. All that's going to do is put more money into social justice warriors' hands. I believe it's like 40% of the federal budget has to go to some social, issue, something like that. But other than that, that's what they're just going to try to do. They're going to use this as climate change. They're going to try to take more power. We can't allow them to do that. If anything, Californians need to wake up and they need to vote these people out. All right. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.